Hi, this is Gary with Aldan American. Today we're here with Alan. He's a good buddy of mine. We've been friends since the 80s. This is his 70 Buick Skylark. He's put a 455 in it, a 5-speed. He's done a lot of work with it. Today we're going to do the installation of the coilovers and the Performance Online upper and lower A-arms. So the first thing we're going to do with our installation is we're going to measure our ride height. So we want to measure all 4 corners. We want to know where the car is to start with, because if there's any indiscrepancies in the ride height, we want to know it before we take it apart.
Okay, so we're going to take some measurements here. We're going to use the center line of the wheel to the wheel opening molding, and it looks like here we have 25 inches.
As you can see on our 70 Buick, it is not leveled. The front is 24.5 and 25, and the back is 24.25 and 24.75. So when we do our adjustment on our ride height with our coilovers, we're going to try to square the car up and make it level. So I've made this little hook out of some brake line, and so what I'm going to use it for is when I take the caliper off, I'm going to hook it to the caliper and then hook it to the frame so that the caliper is not supported by just the hose.
Our next step here, we're going to take the sway bar end link off using our impact and our 9/16" wrench.
So next we're going to knock the ball joints loose from the spindle. It has a tapered seat, so when you loosen the nut, it's still going to stay fixed to the spindle and the ball joint. So of the different methods, there's the air hammer method, which I like using a lot of times, and you just kind of rattle on the spindle and it'll knock the ball joint loose from the taper after you loosen the nut, but do not remove the nut. Another method is a ball joint separator. I also like using these a lot. What it does is it unscrews and it pushes the ball joints loose from the taper. And of course, the old method of beating on it with a hammer, which you can also damage and mark up the spindle a lot more than you do with an air hammer. So when we go to put our lower control arm up into the frame, you'll see it's a little bit tight. It doesn't want to quite fit. This side is fitting nice, but this side doesn't want to fit. So I've got this tool I made. It's a couple of washers, some 1/2-inch threaded rod, and we put it in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spread the frame apart a little bit.
Now we're going to torque the lower control arm bolts to 75 pounds. So if everything is torqued correctly, you should be able to freely move the arms on their bushings. We are now going to remove the upper control arm nuts. So now we're going to verify this is the correct control arm for the passenger side. How we do that, we're going to match it up with the original one we just took off. As you can see, everything lines up. All the bolt holes lines up. This is the correct control arm for that side of the vehicle.
We're going to install our double adjustable shocks. So the knob on the top will have to be unscrewed. Don't unscrew the set screws, just unscrew the knob as a whole, just like that. Then you can take your nuts off and the bushing, and now it's ready to install. We're going to also install our thrust bearings, which will make it a lot easier to adjust the springs. The bearings are a bearing steel. They're not plated, so they will rust. So we want to put a little bit of grease on them. That will also make it easier to adjust the spring. Before we install our shock, what we want to do is take a little bit of copper-based anti-seize, and we're going to put it on the threads above the spring seat. So as we're adjusting, it'll draw it in.
So now we're going to install the spring onto the spring seat and install it in the vehicle. After making sure the bushing is aligned in the hull, we're going to tighten this, but only to the point where we have a little bit of a wiggle, so it'll be easier to install on the lower control arm. So we've tightened the lower bolts. Now we're going to move to tighten the top pushing bolt. Now we're going to install the adjusting knob. We're going to tighten it all the way to the bottom and then back it off 10 clicks. We are now at the center point of the adjustment range.
Before we put the spindle back on, what I'm going to do is adjust the lower spring seat. So what I'm going to do is put an inch of thread showing on the bottom below the spring seat. That's a good starting point, so when we put the car on the ground, we can then finalize our ride height to where we want it to sit. We're now going to move to the rear of the car and install the coilover kit. First, what I've done is I've supported the rear axle. We're going to take the rear shocks, the rear springs off, and then we're going to start installing our coilover kit. So on the rear, we're going to install our double adjustable coilover kit. So we've already installed the upper brackets, and now we're ready to install the shock. The first thing we're going to do is install our spacers for the upper, and then on the adjuster, it has 11 positions of rebound adjustment. So what I'm going to do is go full counterclockwise, which is the softest position, and then I'm going to click it 1, 2, 3, and that's a good starting point for this particular car. Now we're going to take the lower trailing arm bolt out so we can put our new bracket in place.
Now that the bottom bracket's been put in place, now we're going to tighten the bolts to 75 foot-pounds. Now that the shock's been put in place, we're going to torque this at 75 foot-pounds also. Now that we've completed the suspension front and back, it's time to put the wheels and tires back on, lower the car, and check for ride height.
Now that we've completed our installation, we're going to put the car on the ground. I can't wait to go out and drive it, see how it performs. For more information, check us out at aldanamerican.com.